Welcome to another interview for the Kansas City Garment Industry Project. Today is February 3rd, 2011. I'm John Dvorak, and I'm interviewing Eileen Garry, whose husband Marshall operated a company in Kansas City called the Garry Company. She's going to tell us a lot about how the garment industry was supplied with things like cloth and machinery. The videographer today is Mark Titus. Eileen, tell us when you met your husband-to-be and how you two became a couple.
Okay, I met my husband in 1945 in New York, introduced through a mutual friend, and we became engaged 4 months later and married a year after that. So it was that end of the Second World War pretty much. He was in the service, he was in the Merchant Marine when I met him. I was in college, and we were very young. Oh God, were we young. But we opted to move back to Kansas City. I'm from New York, and he wanted to live in Kansas City, so we moved back.
My guess is you knew nothing about the garment industry at that time.
Absolutely nothing. I knew nothing about Kansas City. I had an uncle who was the most wonderful designer and tailor in New York, actually. He made a lot of my clothes when I was a little girl. And he came to me and heard that I was going to Kansas City, and he said to me, "You must tell me something. What ocean is it near?" That was his reference, because water was such an important part of our lives on the East Coast. And when I told him there was none, he said, "How could you go there?" And I said, "Well, I'll let you know, because I'm going." But I was that kind of a kid and got married. We were married in 46 and moved to Kansas City. Been here ever since.
Were you from New York City?
From Brooklyn, New York.
I see. Now, your husband was not in the garment business immediately upon your marriage.
Yes, he was. Well, he had made the decision when we came back to Kansas City instead of staying in New York. He made the decision to go into business with his dad, who was Bert Geary, and who had been in the industry for a number of years, knew everybody in the garment industry. Those were his friends, those were his cronies, and he introduced Marshall to all of those people, and
I'm going to stop you. Your husband made a decision that he wanted to go into business with his father.
Right.
Did you know about the company, or
Absolutely not.
was all of this news to you?
Yes. Yeah, I knew nothing about it. Nothing. My only introduction was when my father-in-law-to-be came to New York and spent time with my family, and proceeded to tell him that, to tell my family that this is what Marshall was going to do. He was going to go into and go into the industry, because let me tell you that it made a very fine living for Bert Geary. And during those years when things were hard to get, he had great sources in New York that could bring all of that kind of commodities to Kansas City.
Tell us about the company.
Well, the company was a little teeny. They had an office in the Manufacturers Exchange building on 8th Street, and they represented fabric people, the Mayman Company, who made the machines that cut the fabrics. They represented every aspect of the garment industry. You name it, they represented them. Marshall traveled on the road some. He traveled to various communities out here, whether it was Topeka or Wichita, Des Moines, or, that whole, he had 5 states, as I remember. I'd have to think about which ones. Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri. Is that 5 states? Oklahoma. Yeah. Those were the 5 states. And he traveled. He was, actually, I guess you could almost say that he was a traveling salesman. That's what he did. And he loved it because he met people and he had friends all over the place. And everybody bought from him. There was no question.
Was it a large company or did they need
Small.
many employees?
No, just the two of them.
Just the two of them?
Yeah. And they had somebody who was in the office, and don't ask me who she is because I don't remember. They had somebody in the office who did the bookwork.
So their job then was to match the needs of garment manufacturers with the equipment or the supplies that they provided.
Exactly.
What types of things did they sell?
What type? Well, depending upon what the need was. If a firm came to them and said, we need corduroy, they supplied the corduroy. If they needed velvet, they supplied the velvet. If they needed just plain cotton fabrics, they supplied those fabrics.
And they knew where to go to buy those things.
In many instances, they were already representing those firms that that executed those needs, that helped them to create those needs.
Do you know much about the history of the company, how far back it went?
I know. Off the top of my head, I cannot tell you that. I do know that my father-in-law was doing this before I met Marshall. So it was certainly in the 40s. And for all I know, it may have reached back into the 30s. Because my father-in-law also came from New York. And he created this for himself. Because he wanted to get out of New York. And he originally was working for the post office. And somebody said to him, there's a great need for salespeople. And you fit the need, you love people. It will be easy for you to, and he was so friendly with all of the people, whether it was Brandon Puritz or Henry Present. There was a slew of people who were doing this. And he knew them all, and so he filled the need.
What kind of a man was he?
My father-in-law?
Yes.
My father-in-law was probably one of the most outgoing, very much like Marshall, actually. He loved people, and as a result, he was able to make these connections that created this business for him. And as I said, he did very well with it. He really did.
And he founded the business?
Yes.
From nothing?
I would imagine in the 30s. You know, it's interesting. I used to have a little ruler. I don't know where it is. I looked for it before you guys came. That said B. Garry Company on it. And it said the date that it was founded. And I don't know where that ruler is, and I'm sorry, because I would have been glad to give it to you, and you could have photographed it and all that good stuff. And I will continue to look for it. But I had it, and I don't have it anymore. I don't know. Maybe one of my kids took it, because they have a way of absconding with things that have some kind of memorabilia.
What did you think when your husband told you that he was going to be going into business with his father?
I thought it was great. I had no compunction about it. My father-in-law sold it, said that it was going to be great and Marshall would do well in it. And I was a young kid. What did I know? I had no clue. And I had had just graduated from school.
Where did you go to school?
NYU.
Thank you.
In New York.
What'd you major in?
Sociology.
Yeah.
Didn't do me any good, but I did. And so I didn't know what I was doing or where I was going. I went back to New York 5 times the first year I was here. That's how lonely I was. Had no clue what Kansas City was like. And the interesting thing is that this Marion Leonard that I talked about, who was at Hartsfield's for 110 years, was my first friend here. She befriended me. And it was a lifesaver. It really was.
Well, how did things go in the early years with your husband at the company?
Fine. We had no children until we were married for 3 years, so I went with him when he traveled, and we had a great time. And as I say, he loved it.
How often would he be gone?
Almost every week for 4 days. Almost every week.
Did he drive or did he take the train?
Drive.
What kind of car did he have?
Holy cow.
I mean, John didn't ask that question. I did.
I'm just curious. What kind of a car did he have? Oh, I know what kind of a car he had. His dad, we had no car. We didn't have that kind of money, remember. We didn't have a lot of money. And so his dad bought him a Chevrolet, four-door Chevrolet. I did not drive at that point in time. And so, it was like a vacation. We had a great time.
You went with him a lot of the time?
A lot.
Tell me where you would go and what would happen when you got there.
Well, we went to he would introduce me to a lot of these people who I had no clue where I was or who I went with. I remember driving with him someplace and we ran into an electrical storm, into a thunderstorm. I had never seen such lightning. We were out on the plains of Kansas. And it was so new to me. It was like a revelation. But I went with him, and we had a great time. Met some of the people he knew. I'm still friendly with some of the people from Wichita, where we stayed, who he knew, and where he was received with great aplomb, if you will.
What types of companies would he be calling on these
Manufacturing, all manufacturing. He never sold little stores that had piece goods or fabrics in them. He only went to manufacturing.
Stores companies that manufacture clothing.
Right, primarily.
Not shoes or
No.
Or
Just
hats.
Clothing. All clothing.
Were these big companies, small companies, in between?
All that. But manufacturing companies. I mean, he didn't go into a little store. That wasn't who he was.
Right.
And that was it.
Do you remember any of the particularly important companies that he called on? Do you remember them by name?
Well, most of them here in Kansas City. I don't remember them from out of town. But here in Kansas City, all of them. Whether it was Brandon Puritz, or whether it was Henry Present, or there was a Rose Company, or if there was I'd have to think. Who were some of the other companies? There were so many in Kansas City. It was really a major hub for all of that. And I remember when one of them, remember which one, was manufacturing the garments for TWA.
That was Brandon Puritz.
That was Brandon Puritz. They were really a mainstay of his life. He supplied all of the stuff to Brandon Puritz.
Really?
Yeah.
Brandon Puritz made uniforms for most of the TWA employees, whether they were stewardesses or pilots.
Yeah, all of them.
And so then your husband's company would have provided that raw fabric?
Right. Fabric, thread, cutting machines, accessories, like if there was something on them that had to be accessorized, all of that.
I see. When you went with him, you would occasionally meet some of these manufacturing company representatives. What were they like?
They were like people. They were just nice people. I was just thinking to myself, he was not the only one that did this, because remember, this was a large manufacturing area. And he was not the only one providing these accessories to the garment industry. I think there was somebody by the name of Lubin. What was his first name? Lubin. I don't remember offhand. I'd have to think. But what I'm saying is that he wasn't the only one, nor was my father-in-law the only one that was providing. Although some of the things that they had they were the only ones that had it in terms of providing it for the garment industry.
Though this was a likable bunch of people, the manufacturers and their workers.
Right. Well, you talked about the garment industry, the meeting. What did you tell me the name of that was?
Kansas City Apparel.
The Kansas City Apparel. These guys loved each other. They met all the time, and it was not me against you. It was a real affable group of individuals, and they were all different people from the garment industry.
After your husband had been in the company for a while, was he really enjoying it?
Well, he stayed there for a period of time, and then he branched out into other things. He did not remained, because you see the garment industry in Kansas City kind of dissipated and was not what it was when he first went into it. So he had to find other avenues and other venues and other people to, because he was a commission merchant. Actually, that was what his title was. And he had to go find others outside of the garment industry because it was losing its force, if you will.
When did that start, that he had to
I knew
branch
you were
out?
going to ask me that, and
In the
I'm not
50s,
sure.
in the 50s.
Maybe in the late 50s, early 60s.
So he had maybe 10 years, 15 years with the Garry Company that
Right.
things went real well.
Yeah. And it always remained Garry Company. You know, Marshall kind of changed it to M. Garry Company, but it was always Garry Company, even when he went into other avenues.
When things were going well in the 50s, did he really like the work and
Well, he loved it.
like the company?
Loved it. Loved it. And, you know, the income was good, and the people were nice, and he loved it.
The company made a good
Good living.
good
Yep.
revenue.
Yep. 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 It did.
What happened then? You said that he had to branch out. Was that because the garment industry began to change and
Right.
dry up?
It did. Absolutely.
What happened?
Well, I don't know whether it was overseas imports that changed the minds of the people here, whether it was just the whole emphasis of the garment industry moved elsewhere, maybe to California. I don't know. I guess the labor market was what directed it to a great degree, and Kansas City lost out. There was no question about it. It wasn't in the 60s, and certainly not in the 70s, what it was in the 40s. No way.
Do you remember your father-in-law talking about this, or was he still around at that time?
Well, toward the end he was. My father-in-law had an unfortunate ending. He was hurt in a automobile accident, and so his involvement was cut short. As a matter of fact, Marshall, the day that his father was hurt in the accident, was in Chicago at a
A convention?
Thank you. Well, not only a convention, but
An industry association.
an industry
meeting.
association, looking for new lines and talking to people and seeing where to go. And he had to come back from Chicago when that happened, because he was at the first week in January, I think, was the show in Chicago. I think that was right.
At the Merchandise Mart.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's where it was.
And then your father-in-law was no longer involved with the company
Couldn't
after.
be. Couldn't be. Died.
Oh, he died as a result of the accident? Approximately when was that? Do you recall the year?
Well, had to be in the 60s. I'm trying to think. My oldest son, Josh, was 6, and Josh was born in 49. So that was approximately maybe Josh was a little older than that. 6, 7 years old.
Right around 1960.
That's what I said. Things began to change dramatically after that. And then, of course, Marshall took over, so he moved it in his own direction.
Do you recall, was your father-in-law worried about the company prior to his
No.
death?
No,
He thought everything was going
fine.
great guns.
Yeah.
So he had a good living and good fun
Yes.
throughout his life with the
Yes.
company.
Yes. Yes.
What happened then when your husband took over the company? What types of things did he try to do differently?
Well, he had to fill the holes for those people that were moving on, changing their mode of operation, and there was a lot of change going on here. There's no question about it, and it was primarily in the 60s.
What types of things did he do differently?
Well, he engaged in representing different kinds of firms. He represented, you name it, linens, furniture. I mean, he just branched out. He just went his own way because the garment industry had kind of lost its glow.
How did your husband feel about that?
Poorly. He was very upset over it. He really was, but there was nothing he could do about it, because he was just a little cog in a large wheel that just wasn't turning as efficiently as it had. And he had little children, and he had to go out and make a living. It was just that simple.
Did he talk to you about it
Sure.
a lot?
Not a lot, but he talked to me about it. I knew that it was happening, and I knew that things had to change, and he knew that things had to change, and change they did.
And you knew there was trouble in the garment industry.
Yes, yes. We saw it coming.
Could he have done anything?
No,
Or was it all beyond his?
it was totally beyond his scope of influence. Nothing. And he wasn't terribly upset about it, because it gave him the opportunity to meet new people, go and see new faces, and his scope was changed. His whole idea of who he was and what was going on changed a great deal. So, and it was good. It was good for him. I mean, he traveled, and he was able to do things that he probably also wanted to do when his dad was alive. But because his father's influence was pretty strong, he didn't. So that this was an opportunity to do different things.
He was still selling. It
Yeah.
was just different
Yeah.
types of things that he
Sold
was
till
selling.
the day he died. That's who he was. Loved it.
Did he still travel a lot when he was selling furniture?
Not as much, because there were thriving people here. It's interesting. The Nebraska Furniture Mart was one of his clients. In the early years, he knew.
Really?
He knew. He knew Mrs. Blumpkin,
Mrs. B.
Mrs. B, and he was a good friend of hers. And weren't they in Omaha originally?
Yeah.
And he would love going up to Omaha, because he had all kinds of friends there. And she was very loyal to him. Very loyal to him.
He knew her before she was 100 years old, probably.
He knew her when she was using a golf cart in the factory, because it got so big she couldn't walk it, and so she had a golf cart.
It's before Warren Buffett.
Yes, it was before Warren Buffett. It was. I mean, it was her and her kids.
I'm from Nebraska.
Oh, well, then you know this.
I sat on, lined on, and slept on Nebraska Furniture Mart
All your
furniture.
life.
Well, I still am to a degree. And several of my relatives worked for the company, so
Yeah. Well, he was a good friend of hers. I mean, he really did. He used to go up there, and he would take her out to lunch and all kinds of stuff.
Did he continue to service the garment industry as well?
As much as there was here, yes. Yes, but it really, it seems to me, as I remember it kind of went downhill quickly. I guess it was the labor market that really hurt it drastically.
Did he tell you what he saw wrong in
No.
the industry?
Nope.
Do you think he even knew?
Do I think he knew? I would assume that he knew or had an idea of what was going on, but we didn't discuss it, because it was his decision as to where he would go and who he would see and who he would deal with. So Marshall could sell anything to anybody at any time. So he never felt that he was restricted in where he could go and what he could do. And it wasn't going to be in the garment industry. If the garment industry didn't do for him what he wanted it to do, he went elsewhere. And he did. There was no question about it.
Do you think he loved the garment industry, or did he love selling?
He loved
primarily?
selling. He loved selling. He loved selling. He'd get a kick out of it, because if somebody bought into what he wanted, because that was his personality. He loved people, and that's who he was.
Now, you say he was active with the industry association here in Kansas City and went to their meetings. So he knew a lot of the people involved in the industry.
Interesting. Regina Pachter, whose husband was a manufacturer, one of the manufacturers, the Pactor brothers, if you will. Can't think of their first names.
Meyer.
Who's the other one?
I don't remember the other one. I just knew Meyer.
Okay. Well, it was Regina's husband. She brought me a picture of all the guys from the, you're gonna ask me where it is.
No.
Oh, I know where it is. We gave it to the archives, the Kansas City archives, of all the men in the garment industry that he was friendly with. And he was very friendly. I don't think it was Meyer. Maybe it was Meyer. And they, you know, he knew them all.
What were they like?
They were like guys and men, and they had a lot in common, and they enjoyed each other's company.
So they weren't a hard-bitten competitive
No,
group in the sense that we sometimes see today.
no, they were not. They really were all good friends. There was a club here called the Standard Club, located in the Ambassador Hotel, I do believe. These guys met 2 and 3 times a week and played cards together. Very social, very social. And Marshall didn't play cards because Marshall wasn't a card player, but my father-in-law was a card player, and he was at the Standard Club 2 and 3 times a week.
Bridge or poker?
Poker.
Because we did an interview.
They played bridge.
They played bridge downtown.
Well, where's the Standard
where-
Club?
Well, the Ambassador Hotel is across or on the west side of Broadway,
It
a
was
little
the
bit
top.
south of the Casey Life Building at Armour.
Right, and it was the top floor. They had the top
Right.
floor, and that was
The top floor of that building.
of the Ambassador Hotel.
Across from the Congress Building.
Yeah, I know.
Right,
what it
and
is.
then they moved out on Gregory. The Standard Club moved out on Gregory.
So they're not in the garment district.
No, not really. But they all met through the garment industry. They all enjoyed each other through the garment industry. So that was the thread that went through that made this thing work. And they loved being together.
You kind of describe a more civil lifestyle, if you will, sort of a more appealing way of life than what we have today. Do you ever look back on those years and the 50s and 60s and think that they were pretty good years?
Well, I think they were pretty good years for those of us who were raising children and doing all kinds of things. That's who we were. But I think that it's the nature of the individual. I think Marshall loved people. So that's what made him successful in what he did. Because he enjoyed the people that he was working for. And I think they were more civil, but I don't know, because I don't know that industry, of course that industry is gone in Kansas City, which is really kind of a real sadness, but it is gone. But the people that were in it at that time were very civil to each other. You never heard the wrangling and the arguing, and I'm sure there was. I wasn't in on what was happening on a day-to-day basis as to how they were working, and I'm sure there were disagreements and arguments and stuff like that, but by and large they enjoyed each other.
Tell us about the company in the 60s and what happened with the company ultimately.
Marshall's company?
Yes.
Well, what happened was that with the drying up of the involvement of the garment industry and those companies, he had to look elsewhere, and he did. That's what I said. He represented furniture companies, he represented all kinds of people, all kinds. And you're going to ask me the specifics, and I don't remember them.
How did that go? Was he successful at that?
Yeah, he was successful because, as I said, Marshall was a born salesman, and he could sell anybody anything. It's the way he was.
How long did the company last?
What, Garry Company?
Yes.
Till about, well, I'll tell you how long it lasted. As I think back, it lasted until he had to move out of the MEB building because it was destroyed. They tore it down. Then he went elsewhere, and in doing that, he wasn't part of that place, that garment center. That was no longer. And so whenever that happened, he looked elsewhere and did other things.
Where did the company move to?
Where did the company move to? Well, I know where it... Oh, the VFW building.
On Broadway?
He was there for many years. Had an office there and worked out of the VFW building. Had many friends there too, knew everybody. But that's where he ended up. Not ended, but that was where they went, to the VFW building.
Did the company then finally close, or what were...
Well, it just wasn't anymore. It just wasn't. It was just Marshall Geary in an office with many clients and many people that he represented, and it was no longer... It didn't have the same emphasis. The initial emphasis was the garment district, and that disappeared, and it disappeared. Just that simple. So sad.
When did the company come to a final end?
Well, it really came to a final end when Marshall passed away. As such. I mean, because he was at the VFW building for 30 years. Easy.
When did he pass away?
But you think I know that exact? I think it's 4 years ago. Going to be 5 years ago.
So he was working in the company right up until...
Right up until he got sick, right.
Was he very busy at the end, or...?
I can't tell you that exactly because...
He went to the office every day though, right?
But he was in his office every
Yeah.
day. Every single day.
How old was he when he died?
81. We were married, 82 maybe. We had been married 61 years.
He wasn't real anxious to retire, apparently.
Anxious.
Retirement
That
is
was
for
a-
sissies,
That was
believe
a
me.
dirty word. That was a dirty word. He didn't know how to retire. Marshall didn't play cards. Marshall played some golf. And not well, poorly. But he loved it. He loved it, loved it. He had a foursome of golf buddies that he loved. But Marshall didn't know how to retire. What would he do with himself?
Well, was he still selling right up until the end?
By phone, absolutely.
Not in the volume, presumably,
No,
that he
no,
did
no, no.
years earlier.
No.
What types of things would he have been selling in those final?
Yeah,
In those
I
final
knew you were going to ask me that. Marshall was selling funeral supplies. He had made contact with how? Don't ask me. I don't know. But Marshall was selling. That's why I said he could sell anything to anybody at any time. And he met somebody who said to him, "You really ought to sell this good money." And, that's who Marshall was. He was not somebody who was trying to, if I were a rich man, he just loved what he did. And he didn't retire. He couldn't. Everybody else did, but he didn't.
Well, there isn't much of the garment industry left. I don't
None.
suppose he was selling
No.
anything to them anymore, was he?
No, he was not. No, he was. There wasn't anything, nobody to sell to in Kansas City. And at that point in time, he wasn't traveling on the road like he did in years past. That was something that was over.
He never sat around and wrung his hands about the demise of the garment
No.
industry.
No, he did not. No, he did not. He felt very badly that it had, kind of gone the way of all flesh, if you will. And but as I said, I do believe it was the labor market that hurt the whole garment district here.
Did he keep in contact with any of the people
Sure.
in the industry? Do you
Yes. Oh, he did. He did. You know who he was? He was very friendly with, in the early years, well, many years, with Sam Kaplan, who had Capel Fabrics. That was a whole different part of his life. But he was, that was related to the garment industry in its day because Sam Kaplan had a thriving business in fabrics, and if Marshall needed something that he couldn't get his hands on quickly, he'd go to Sam Kaplan, and Sam Kaplan would help him out. They were very good friends.
They're finally shutting that store on the plaza.
Are
The
they
Kaplan's.
Capel?
Yeah.
Oh, it's Kaplan's, not Capel. Capel
the
was Sam
retail
Kaplan.
store.
They're closing it.
Yeah.
There's nobody to keep it open, I'll bet.
My son's probably retirement age now. He's my age, in his 60s. I was down there and bought some black velvet for some photographs I was taking, and
Well, but and he wasn't that, what's his name? Rudnick.
Cy, yeah,
Cy Rudnick had a wonderful fabric place, but see, that wasn't Marshall's thing. Sam, that was personal, where somebody would
retail.
go in the retail end of it and buy 2 yards of velvet, if you
Right,
will.
exactly.
And that was not for Marshall. But when he needed a major amount of whatever he needed, he'd go to Sam Kaplan, and they were very, very good friends.
Well, your husband dealt in what? Train carloads of fabric?
Whatever was needed. Whatever was needed. I was only thinking the other day, these machines, these cutting machines that came out of the Mayman Cutting Machine Company, they were one of a kind in the industry. Nobody else had them. So that was really a coup having those, because if somebody came along and had to cut up a trainload of fabric, you couldn't use a scissor, God knows. So you had to have these wonderful machines. I don't know whatever happened to them. I think there's one in the archives. I think one was salvaged and is in the archives down, that Sybil has put together. But those were the machines, and they sold those machines, and they were very expensive. I don't know what that means in today's world, but they certainly were more expensive than a pair of scissors. And you would see them on flat tables and flat contraptions, and there would be Mayman cutting machines on all of those places.
Knowing that your husband was heavily involved in the garment industry in the 50s and 60s,
And 40s.
And 40s, did you attempt to buy clothes that were made in Kansas City? Was that something you thought about? Or?
Sure, did. I remember going to Brandon Purett's, because they made great coats, and I remember buying coats on a Saturday, and I can't think of his name. What was the son-in-law? God almighty, Eileen. Who was Hyman Brand's son-in-law? Francis's husband. It's not coming, but anyway, he would take me through the whole factory and show me and say to me, pick out whatever you want.
Oh, really? So you got special treatment?
Oh yeah. And as my daughter was growing up, we'd go down there, and she would get special treatment down at Brandon Purett's.
Did you still have to buy the stuff?
Well, sort of. Not big time.
Did you kind of get a kick out of the fact that your husband
Sure.
probably supplied the
fabric,
raw material?
That's right. I did. We used to laugh about that. But that was how it went.
Did he ever do any work with Nellie Don, the big dress company?
Yes. But my father-in-law did. My father-in-law, Bert Geary, sold fabric to Nellie Don, because they were big. Forgot about them. And also Stern, Slegman and Prince was a big customer of theirs.
I think they did coats,
Right.
or maybe women's suits. Or both.
Right. They were customers of both of them, Marshall and Bert. Right. Forgot about them. There were so many. There were so many garment people here. Think about it. My God. It was just fabulous. It was wonderful.
Do you think about that when you go down, or do you go
Yes.
down to 8th and Broadway every now and then? Or?
Every now and then. When I go sometimes if I'm driving to the airport and I go that way, I do think about that.
Well, what do you think about it?
I remember the smell of Folger's coffee down there, which is no longer there, which I miss. And so that was all part of it. That was all part of those buildings. Every one of those buildings had some kind of the Tsar family, the Zarlinskys had a major manufacturing place down there. As I sit here and I think of more people. And do I think about it when I go down? Absolutely. It was a very thriving area, my God. Trucks would come and go, and people would come at noon when people, and I'm sure they were paying them little or no money, but when all these people would go out for lunch, they would all be out on the street. There was a place called Tallman's Grill. You couldn't get into it. You couldn't get into it. Am I right? Yes?
Right. We were talking with Mrs. Epstein the
We
other
just
day.
talked to a lady
Oh,
about
they
Talman Grill.
across the street.
Yeah, yeah.
They had their place. But that wasn't a manufacturing place.
It was a hardware store.
It was a hardware store.
Right.
And what a hardware store.
Well, it still is, actually.
No, I mean, it was, but everybody went to Talman's Grill for lunch, couldn't get in the front door.
Well, do you feel sad about this, or do you
Of course,
just figure
of
this
course.
is the way life evolves, or?
I think of that in both regard. I think this is the way life evolves. I think it's too bad that life evolves in that way, because there are some areas in the United States where whatever it is they were doing didn't disappear. It's true. But I mean, I know that my dad had a factory in New York. My dad was in the glass business. And they used to make glass specialties. And he must have had 30, 40, 50 people working for him at a time, particularly during the war. That's all gone. It's all gone. It's all gone. So that there's a lot of change all over the United, certainly all over the world, in how things have changed.
Do you think the younger people around Kansas City have any conception of how Kansas City was once a major garment producer?
None. Absolutely none. I would venture to say my own kids don't even know that. I really don't know. I can't say with any kind of confidence that my kids knew that there was that maybe a little, but not seriously.
They never went downtown to meet their daddy or their grandpa.
Yeah, but so that was all part of their world, but it wasn't something that they retained. I mean, my kids are old today. They're all parents and they have children and grandchildren. And but I don't think that that's part of their. I'd have to ask them. I don't think it's part of their psyche today. I really don't.
Now, when they were growing up, were you members of Beth Shalom or
B'nai Yehuda.
B'nai Yehuda? And they did all of their Hebrew schools through
B'nai
that?
Yehuda, all B'nai Yehuda.
All right, okay.
I started at Beth Shalom, and I was there for about 2 or 3 months because my dad was very active in the synagogue in New York. And I was there maybe 3 or 4 times, and Marshall turned to me and he said, "We don't belong. You don't understand a word that's going on here." And so we moved to B'nai Yehuda and stayed there until I helped start Beth Torah.
Right.
It's me.
Do you think more should be done to preserve the history of the garment industry in Kansas City?
I think, yes, I do. I do, because I think it was a major part of what, I don't know how much you've interviewed Betty Brand and that part of the family, but there are a lot of people that should be remembered for what they contributed to this city. I think it was something that that this city should not forget. I mean, there was a TWA at one point in time, and every outfit, every uniform, every one of them was made right here in River City, if you will. And they were all made here. Coats were made here. They were exported to all parts of the United States. Things were done here. It was a thriving, exciting kind of an industry, and it's gone. And I think it's sad that there isn't any kind of acknowledgement that it happened here, and that young people like my children's ages, I'd have to ask my kids, actually. I've never done that, and I probably should. Must ask my son Paul. He would remember, and maybe Steph, I don't know, because she was young, she was the youngest. But I think it's very sad. There should be is there a plaque downtown?
Yes.
I think there is, isn't there?
Yes.
that, what's his name, had something to do with, what's her name?
Freed.
Thanks.
Oh, Joe Ellen.
Well, several.
Sue Ellen.
Sue Ellen.
Number of people.
Harvey.
Harvey.
Harvey
that's
was
the
really
one.
the guy behind the Garment Industry Museum.
Right.
Yeah.
And whatever came of it?
I thought we had one, but nobody goes there.
Well, we're not
What?
gonna discuss that with the tape roll.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
we won't.
Actually, I think we've come to the end of the interview.
Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
stop tape then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Is that thing off?
Not yet.